Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, and welcome to this Dissenter Weekly for this is November 12th of 2020. Before we get rolling with our whistleblower stories for the week, Brian's got a few things for you.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Just a friendly reminder to make sure you're following us wherever you're watching right now. And if you want to support our work, make sure that we can fund our reporting, keep our website online. You could either go to shadowproof.com/donate, or you can sign up for Kevin's newsletter, which puts out a great weekly report on whistleblowing news at dissenter.substack.com. We'll put up a link to that at the end. It'll be in the description. Today, we are actually talking about the Biden-Harris transition. Isn't that right, Kevin?
Yeah.
And so why don't you tell us a little bit about, set the stage for us. Tell us what you want to talk about today.
So first, I want to say that, normally for this show, if this is the first time watching the Dissenter Weekly, we'd go through whistleblower stories from the past week. And also, I generally work in updates about Julian Assange's case. And we have a bit of an Assange update at the end of this show. But what I wanted to do, because there really weren't too many whistleblower stories from the past week. There are pseudo stories. The Republicans are really trying to gin up, quote unquote, whistleblowers. They're mostly phony people who have been paid by Republican operatives to pretend they're whistleblowers who are exposing election fraud. There's really nothing there, and they're essentially trying to spread conspiracy theories among the population and sow discontent. So I wanted to focus on who is going to be advising and developing the policy around a Biden-Harris administration. I wanted to look at these agency review teams. So these are groups of people who are essentially tasked with developing the way in which they're going to hit the ground running for each of the departments, whether it's the State Department, the Defense Department, the Justice Department, or more broadly, they describe it as the intelligence community. They like to think of themselves as a nice little group of people who meet together and sip coffee and have our best interests. And so we will start out first by, all of the people that I have on this list are, they relate to what this show is typically. They involve whistleblowers. I'll just say first that if you want to see the other people that I'm highlighting or have highlighted, I've done a lot of work. You can go to @KGosztola. @KGosztola is my Twitter handle, and you can go there and find the thread that has people in the Biden-Harris transition team that are people who are involved in all parts of the government, whether it's finance, they could be involved in the commerce. These could be people who are not necessarily in these agencies that I just named, but for these people, they relate to some of what we follow on this show. And so we'll begin here with Neil McBride. And Neil is part of the Justice Department group. And I think Neil is really important for us to track because he was somebody who oversaw the grand jury investigation into WikiLeaks. He was involved in impaneling these people who were tasked with essentially going after anyone who associated with this media organization. And ultimately, this is the grand jury that laid dormant, and then President Donald Trump decided to wake it up and use it to bring charges against Julian Assange. And we know we've been following the extradition case against Julian Assange. Neil McBride was also involved in the record number of leak prosecutions that were brought against people in the Obama administration under the Espionage Act. He was the one who was the lead prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia because he was the U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia. He's responsible for these cases. He brought the case against John Kiriakou, who was at first charged with Espionage Act violations, and then was accepted a plea deal for an Intelligence Identities Protection Act violation, and those Espionage Act charges went away. Ultimately, they were just used as leverage to force John Kiriakou to plea to something that would result in a much a shorter sentence. And then Jeffrey Sterling is a CIA whistleblower who was the target of a leak prosecution. And so, Brian, we've got so we're going to do something we haven't done on this show before. We're going to try to play a clip. The volume may not be as great as we would like, but I believe you're going to be able to hear Neil McBride, who is at the Aspen Security Forum. So I'm going to make this go away, and we're going to play this clip. It's about 57 seconds, and just to set it up before Brian clicks play here, this is him in 2013. Edward Snowden has already disclosed his materials. And by the way, if he had stayed on, he would have been the one in charge of the prosecution against NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden, but he did resign later in the year in 2013. He left his position as the U.S. attorney. And so he's talking about what he thinks about the record number of leak prosecutions by President Obama.
The handful of cases that my office is focused on are a very small subset of the overall universe of classified information. And as the folks here on the panel know, that is referred to as NDI, National Defense Information. And so in order to bring a criminal case for the unauthorized release of NDI, it's a fairly high threshold. You need to show that this is information that is critical to the national defense, that the release of which can benefit a foreign government and or hurt the United States. And so,
have we gone overboard, Neil?
No, I don't believe we have. I think that the Attorney General, others have talked about the reason for the increase in leak investigations, again, against a backdrop that we're talking about a handful of investigations out of hundreds of thousands that have been done in the last several years. The handful of cases that...
All right. So that's that clip. And what I can say about that clip is that, one, it wasn't like these leaks, these prosecutions just fell into their lap. We actually know from former officials that they were targeting people to make examples out of them and to deter others from engaging in leaks. There was a kind of paranoia or a kind of culture that said that we needed to set a standard because this could get out of control. And they'll even say openly that they recognized that the technology was making it easier for people within the government to leak, and that they needed to, enforce this standard. If you listen to him, and first off, what's alarming is that he thinks they haven't gone overboard. But then the other thing is he's talking about something called national defense information and how that's a high standard. That means they don't have to, that it's harder for them to abuse their authority in bringing these cases. Well, that's absolutely false because national defense information is a very wide range of information that isn't necessarily classified. So in fact, it would be one that had a higher threshold if they only had to prove that the information was classified, but they can go after people for leaking sensitive information. And that includes materials that WikiLeaks published and that Chelsea Manning disclosed. And the other thing is that they don't have to prove that this information was anything more than classified. So simply put, if they go into the Eastern District of Virginia with information that was classified and they have an authority testify that he went through a process to classify the information, then automatically it's treated as potentially damaging to the national security of the United States if it were to be released. And so it's like a strict liability offense. You reveal it, no matter what that information is, because it's classified, it's considered a crime. So Brian's got one more clip that he's going to play for you from Neil McBride. It's a longer clip, but this is the one, there's really nothing I have to explain. You'll understand why I wanted to include this in the show.
All right, just 1 second here. Here we go.
In one of those cases, Jeffrey Sterling, you sought to compel the testimony of James Wise in the New York Times. He has said absolutely under no circumstances will he testify, and he'll go to jail if he has to. You've appealed to the Fourth Circuit, arguing there is no reporter's privilege, period, in criminal cases, and which does seem to be somewhat at variance with the Attorney General's comments last week about strong support for a media shield law. If you prevail, are you prepared to put a New York Times reporter, James Risen, in jail for refusing to testify?
So let me say a couple things about that. First of all, the administration, including the Attorney General, strongly supports and has for several years a media shield bill, which has been pending in Congress. In fact,
you have a pending argument. There is no reporter's privilege. You've argued that to the Fourth Circuit.
Right. And if you'll allow me, my understanding of the reporter's privilege, reporter shield bill, which I'm told was actually reintroduced yesterday, and they're significant, and they certainly are going to change the way we do business to some extent in these investigations. I've not sort of canvassed the editorial pages of the nation's papers and magazines, but the response seems to have been more generally positive to these new regs. But critically, the department now, if we wish to issue a subpoena, for CNN, for a tape of a demonstration outside an embassy, and that is the usual situation in which we're subpoenaing records.
Can I bring you back to Jeffrey Sterling and James Risen? Do you really want to win this case and be faced with the choice of whether you're going to put the reporter in jail?
So the case is pending before the Fourth Circuit,
and if you
and
win?
as a result, it's a hypothetical. Right? I need to wait to
Do you want to win?
To see what happens.
All right. So he says it's a purely hypothetical thing, whether James Risen would have been jailed under the Obama administration. It absolutely wasn't hypothetical. I mean, they were aggressively pursuing this outcome and knew they were. And you can see I did some editing there so that I could share the clip on Twitter. He goes on and on for about 3 to 4 minutes about everything that has nothing to do with answering Michael Isikoff's question. That's the name of the journalist in this clip from 2013. And he asks very well. I think he asks it as directly, and he presses him to give an answer. And yet he doesn't take it very seriously and talks about these media guidelines that were established, but it didn't change the fact that they were trying to force James Risen, who was a New York Times reporter, to testify against, to reveal his confidential sources on the stand during a trial against Jeffrey Sterling, that they wanted him to be a prosecution witness who could be turned against this whistleblower. Of course, Jeffrey Sterling maintains that he did not provide any information to James Risen that was at issue in his case. That's what he maintains to this day, and the government never proved that he passed any information to James Risen. So let's go on to a few of the other individuals that we have in there. The next person I wanted to talk to you about, she's Barbara McQuade. She's part of the Justice Department group that is working on the transition for the team that will work at the Justice Department. What you need to know about Barbara McQuade is that she was an MSNBC contributor until a few days ago, and she resigned from there. She was worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Michigan. And in that district, it was her job to oversee Detroit and Flint and Dearborn, Michigan. So, that's important because Barbara was in her position. She faced blowback because The Intercept published a story that noted that Dearborn, in a counterterrorism center report, had been designated as a terrorist hotspot, and that was taken in a visceral way. There was a lot of outrage from those in Dearborn. There are Arab, Muslim, and Sikh communities there who have been targets of racial profiling, as well as faced intrusive surveillance by law enforcement, particularly in the post 9/11 world. and they were offended because there's no people in Dearborn that were known to have committed acts of terrorism. So what are they talking about? They're basically saying that they believe this is where the terrorism is most likely to originate in the United States. And that kind of thing was something that Barbara had to deal with. And essentially what she did was what a lot of Democrats seem to do now in order to not take any responsibility. She questioned whether, in fact, the documents, these were leaked documents that were provided to The Intercept, and she questioned whether they might even be accurate. So maybe they might be forgeries. We remember this tactic from the Democrats when WikiLeaks published the Podesta emails that exposed the Clinton campaign, as well as and then also earlier there were DNC emails, so that exposed the Democratic Party to a high level of scrutiny for their actions politically, and they reflexively acted as if they might be forgeries. And so to call into question the accuracy of these documents, which The Intercept had verified, that was her way of dealing with this. And then also, Barbara McQuade is someone who I have a sort of personal connection to because I spoke at an event in which she was also there that same weekend. She had been a speaker, and this was at the University of Michigan, where she's a law professor. There was an event held in February, events held around a play that was based upon the FBI interrogation of Reality Winner, NSA whistleblower Reality Winner. And she was there for a panel. I was invited to participate in a panel, but she was there for a panel to at some point during the weekend, and she was repeating the prosecution's talking points, and she was referring to texts out of context, such as like Reality at one point was expressing her frustration to her sister, I believe, in one of the texts that were at issue in her case. She said something about wanting to go burn the White House down. And that was taken as some kind of threat of violence that was used to basically keep her in detention and not allow her to be out on bail while she awaited trial. So she was referring to this as like something that might show that Reality was actually dangerous. And then in the program, there's a section in the program that had an exchange, which I think takes on some exceptional relevance here, given what we're talking about on the show. So I'll read it to you. It says, "That's an interesting point. Here, Reality Winner disclosed classified information to The Intercept." Remember, The Intercept published the document from Reality Winner. "Do you think it would have been possible to bring a case against The Intercept for publishing this document?" That was asked by a moderator at this, who put together this interview that was published in the program. And Barbara replied, "Under the Espionage Act, as it currently exists, yes, but the Justice Department has restrained itself from doing that. During the Obama administration, I know that there was concern about leak investigations, including search warrants to reporters, and even referring to a reporter as a co-conspirator, even though that reporter wasn't charged." She's talking about James Rosen, who was a Fox News reporter who was labeled an aider and abettor of conspiracy to commit a leak, kind of like what we see with the prosecution against Julian Assange. And then she goes on to say, after the Justice Department's internal review of how to handle these types of situations, Attorney General Holder announced that he didn't want to do anything that would interfere with the legitimate news gathering functions of the media. That's a good goal, but it could be difficult to achieve in practice when you think about how difficult it is nowadays to define who is the media. So astoundingly, she's skeptical of what Eric Holder was trying to do to tamp down some of the outrage coming from the press. And she adds, certainly most people would agree with traditional media outlets like the New York Times. So we can protect those. We can protect the legacy media outlets. But then Barbara went on to say, but how about something like The Intercept or WikiLeaks or just Greg in his basement on his blog? Is that media? So that's where it becomes difficult. But, this contempt for press freedom that she showed is truly something that I think should discredit her when she's going to enter the Justice Department, and she should uphold the First Amendment. And if she's involved at all in the Biden administration, this is something that I think should disqualify her if she can't accept the way that the media is laid out here at this time. People who engage in acts of journalism, whether they are at a leaks organization or they're Greg in their basement. I mean, Greg in their basement to me is probably doing much, much better work than Barbara ever does as a contributor to MSNBC. I mean, I would trust Greg to get to the bottom of government corruption well before she ever comes on MSNBC and questions authority in an adversarial manner, since she was a prosecutor herself. A few other things to work in that I think are alarming if she's going to be a part of establishing policy at the Justice Department for the Biden-Harris administration. There's a case that I followed here in Chicago, where I'm based, involving a Palestinian-American woman named Razmia Odeh, who was eventually deported to Jordan after a political prosecution. Barbara was involved in leading this. She was accused of immigration fraud, but this is what happened. She was tortured by Israeli military forces, accused of committing political violence. After surviving this and being imprisoned, she had a family member who used a connection to the State Department to get her to be able to immigrate to the United States, to be able to leave and get to some safety. And so she came to the United States, and she was here for about 2 decades, I believe. And then at some point, they looked at the records and claimed that she had committed immigration fraud because she didn't describe her background as a militant who had resisted Israeli violence and occupation. And then she came to be someone that they targeted in a number of different cases that targeted solidarity activists, people involved in challenging Israeli military occupation, fighting for Palestinians, but then also some of these people were accused of material support for terrorism because they show solidarity with people in Colombia who were on the other side of U.S. foreign policy. And so she brought this case, highly political, and Razmia was deported to Jordan a couple of years ago. She also was involved in the embarrassing prosecution that collapsed against the Houthi militia, and that was because it involved a paid FBI informant and an infiltrator who, these cases play out, whether we're talking about white supremacist groups or terrorist alleged terrorism suspects. Oftentimes it's, in these cases, entrapment, so to speak, where the person is going in there and trying to get people to talk violently so that they have something that they can prosecute. She downplayed the First Amendment questions here, but a judge ended up acquitting 5 of the 7 people who were charged. And then as far as like the conspiracy that was alleged against this Houthi militia, they went after only 2 of the people they were able to actually salvage with weapons charges against them. But, they were accused of plotting to commit violence, and that all fell apart. She also could have prosecuted officials for poisoning the water in Flint, Michigan. She never brought charges. She had at least 2 years that she could have done something to bring charges against officials that poisoned the water supply in Flint. And yet she left when Trump came into office and didn't issue any, and her office had not issued any charges. But in September, everyone will be happy to know that she was sharing Governor Rick Snyder's endorsement of Joe Biden, despite the fact that Snyder was involved in the poisoning of Flint's water. So, I just don't think that this is a person that should be any near these groups at all, being involved in putting together policy. So, if we can quickly go through, we've got 3 more that I'll try to move a little more quickly through here. Bob Litt is someone who needs to be highlighted because he was the man that was out there for the U.S. intelligence agencies after NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden came forward. He was someone who was talking to all the newspapers to downplay anything that was published in the media. So let's say something was revealed. The example I used in my thread was, let's say they revealed that NSA was storing location data for hundreds of millions of Americans' devices. And then it would be Litt who came out and pretended like there really wasn't anything to see here. It's not a scandal and there's nothing to reform. So he was the guy, but more importantly, he was the person who stood by lying James Clapper, the Office of the Director for National Intelligence, after there was all of this uproar about him going before Congress. We all know now Senator Ron Wyden asks him the question about whether they're collecting the content of Americans' communications, and he's got his hand on his head, his bald, shiny head, and he says no, not wittingly. And it was a lie, and we know it was a lie because it deeply upset Edward Snowden. It actually spurred and accelerated his decision to take documents, go to Hong Kong, and hand them over to Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras and Ewan McCaskill to reveal these mass surveillance programs. And so Bob Litt is on this intelligence community group that is looking at the policy. So what I'll say for this trio of individuals, when I see someone like Bob Litt, I see Barbara McQuade, and I see Neil MacBride, that it doesn't look really good. I think that it's pretty clear that the kinds of Espionage Act prosecutions we saw against people who reveal wrongdoing and corruption within the government are probably going to continue under a Biden-Harris administration. I also don't have a lot of confidence now that Julian Assange is going to see his case dropped. I mean, like if Neil MacBride is the one advising, they never actually indicted Julian Assange, so we'll see if he sticks by that decision. But he might have second thoughts, and this would be his opportunity to stick with the case and from his Justice Department position, shepherd it along and make sure that the Eastern District of Virginia, though he's not there anymore, make sure that they get this win and they're able to prosecute Julian Assange. So I have something to say about that, but first we've got a clip that I just have to play about this relates to Syria policy. So one more thing I'll have you play. It's from Dana Stroul, who is on the State Department group. She was involved in doing it. Just to set up this clip, what you're seeing is she's before a congressional committee. She's testifying about being involved in the Syria study group. And what Dana is essentially saying is why we can't withdraw our forces from Syria, why we're there pushing a regime change. So I'll take this down, and if you've got it, Brian. Hey, Brian, if you unmute yourself, we can hear the video.
My bad. Sorry about that. Let me start it over.
Live broadcasting. Let's try it.
Yeah. All right, here we go.
The reason the Syria study group talked about needing to retain a U.S. military presence in that 1/3 of Syria was not only about completing the anti-ISIS fight, it was about the broader leverage of that 1/3 of Syria, which is the resource-rich part of Syria, which provided us leverage to influence the political outcome in Syria. The reason.
All right. So what you can hear there is she is saying that she and the U.S. government support this policy of leaving forces there not to fight ISIS, but because they need to control Syria's resources in order to force a change in the Syrian government. And it's to have leverage. So coupled with the economic sanctions that we know fuel suffering, coupled with that, they also can have an occupying force in part of Syria's country, which means that they're not able to access certain resources, which means that there's economic deprivation, which means that there's more poverty in Syria, which means that you see people are going to starve, and there's going to be more despair. And that's the point. The point is to strangle the country until they can get the people in power that they want. And regardless of what Assange has, regardless of what Assad has done, that has been terribly corrupt and brutal toward his people, and documented and well documented. This is not the way to go about liberating, but this is the way to go about waging empire. This is the way that an official, and she is with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and this is the policy that comes out of the Israel lobby, because WINEP, as it is known, was started by AIPAC in the 1980s, and that's where she works. And she is somebody who is on the State Department review group working on developing policy. And I presume that one of the first things that these people who are invited into the Biden-Harris administration, what they will do is not take seriously things like what the OPCW whistleblowers have complained about, which we've talked about on this show. They won't try to get to the bottom of who these groups are that might have chemical weapons. They'll resume their regime change policy that they started under Obama that kind of got wonky and thrown away by Donald Trump's administration, or disrupted by Donald Trump's administration, because Trump himself favored the withdrawal of troops. So it meant that there was a lot less that the Pentagon was able to do as far as expanding and pursuing this war. So the next thing I want to point out just quickly is that we've got a couple individuals on the State Department group that come from the German Marshall Fund. And the German Marshall Fund is this project that is this organization that funded a project called Hamilton 68. And it was this tracker that held itself out as being able to track and uncover Russian disinformation operations, Russian influence operations, if you will. And in a sense, what it meant is that a lot of alternative press, people who are dissenting against U.S. foreign policy, who promote narratives that they like to call pro-Kremlin narratives, whatever that might mean, it meant that those people ended up on lists that were targeted for censorship, and were logged as people who were actors that needed to be isolated. My colleague Rania Kalik, who I do the show Unauthorized Disclosure with weekly, had her media organization targeted by the German Marshall Fund, and this is something that was provably embarrassing, because there are multiple times that they labeled certain accounts as being tied to Russian operations, and it turned out to be false. But this is the kind of policy, I think, as far as promoting the talking points of the U.S. government and its foreign policy, that we can expect. We can expect more people in Biden-Harris's administration to push social media companies to censor the accounts, particularly in countries that were opposed to their current administrations. We've already seen censorship against Venezuelan accounts, Iranian accounts, Chinese accounts, Syrian accounts, people who are in Russia, anywhere, all of these countries, people we don't want to hear from because they're our enemies, they're being censored. And that's meant to also, the benefit is also that you're keeping alternative viewpoints that challenge the U.S. government from being out there in the world. And we saw Nicaragua be targeted. And so you go down the list, any of these places in which the U.S. is trying to change who is in power, you censor those officials so that they are in a worse position as far as defending themselves globally. And these platforms have a huge amount of power to limit their ability to talk to people around the globe about what is going on as they're challenged by the United States. So that's what we can expect. That's a flavor for what we can expect from a Biden administration. Thank you for letting me walk you through some of that. I'd like to share this quick Assange update, and then I'll conclude the show. And much thanks to Brian for helping me get through those clips, as it was a new thing that we were trying. So with this Assange update, what I have to say is that I put together a summary of the section of the Assange legal team's closing argument submission that was entered into the court in the British Magistrates Court. We are waiting for that decision to come on January 4th. I mean, in the meantime, I encourage you to go to dissenter.substack.com and read this in its entirety to give you a little bit about what this focus was for Assange's legal team. They were detailing the politically motivated nature of the Trump administration's case and pushing that really hard, because I think that's what they believe will be the easiest way to convince the court that that there shouldn't be this extradition. And actually, we're in a kind of an awkward spot here because Trump lost and Biden is going to be president. Do we know for sure if Julian Assange is still going to be prosecuted by the U.S. government? Now, I hesitate to say that he won't be prosecuted, but I just think that you have to admit, if you recognize reality, that there's going to be a different group of people in the Justice Department that are making decisions. They inherit this case. I believed all along that they're probably going to continue it, but are they going to have to represent to any British court why they are continuing to pursue this case? I don't know. How are they going to defend, if they have to defend in a UK court pursuing this case, when the Obama administration declined to indict Julian Assange back in 2013, and before Neil McBride, who we highlighted in this show, left his position as the U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia. So this is important, I think, to look at Trump as someone who made a political decision. His administration made a political decision. They highlight Bill Barr, but I think most importantly, who I'll turn to as we close the show is Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo got a lot of attention in the past week because he was laughing very sinisterly about how he believed Donald Trump was going to have a second term. He was asked during a State Department press conference what he thought about the transition, and he said he's going to do his best, and he believes that there's going to be a second Trump administration. I mean, it wasn't just delusional, it was sociopathic in the way that he was responding to press who were questioning him. But Mike Pompeo has his fingerprints all over Assange's case, and he always has, because he was the CIA director before he went on to be the Secretary of State in the Trump administration. And it was in 2017 that the Vault 7 materials were published that brought a lot of scrutiny to the CIA. They were definitely upset because it showed how smartphones and computers were being targeted, how the CIA could attack Samsung TVs, the way that they were using what are called zero-day exploits in order to manipulate software vulnerabilities and use them in order to hack into Apple devices. They didn't share this information with the companies, left consumers vulnerable to attacks on their devices. And not just them, but like anybody else could have used these to get into there and violate their privacy, any hacker who identified it. And so you also saw that they were targeting Microsoft Windows users as well as Signal and WhatsApp users with malware. This is something that we had known was a way that the NSA operated, but the CIA is clearly using these tools. Two was the revelation that came from the WikiLeaks Vault 7 materials, and that put a lot of pressure on Mike Pompeo, and they were angry. It led him to say that the false narratives that increasingly define our public discourse cannot be ignored. There are fictions out there that demean and distort the work and achievements of CIA and of the broader intelligence community. And so he spent one of his first speeches as CIA director going after WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. He labeled it a non-state hostile intelligence service that abets state actors like Russia, which we know now the Mueller investigation was not able to find any proof. Otherwise, they probably would have recommended charges against Julian Assange, possibly even in the context of this case that has been unfolding and in the push for his extradition. And he's maintained that Julian Assange has no First Amendment freedoms because he's not a U.S. citizen, and that essentially, this was his way of saying, we found a way to get around what the Obama administration saw as an obstacle. If you just say Julian Assange isn't protected by the First Amendment, then it doesn't demolish press freedom for journalists here in the United States, doesn't open editors who worked on the WikiLeaks documents to prosecution. It just means that we're going to pursue this extraordinary case that we see as, outside the confines of journalism. We see what he did is not journalism. We'll just say it's not journalism, and then we'll go after Julian Assange. And we think that that is a way of dealing with all the groups that believe we've gone a step too far. And so he was involved in, pioneering this way forward of bringing this and believing that it doesn't threaten the right to publish documents. This is absolutely wrong. So he backs the lawfare against Julian Assange, and he backed the espionage operation, undoubtedly, I believe, against Julian Assange that ended up opening him up to the UC Global operation that was going after him while he was in the Ecuador embassy. So I bring that in there. It's a big focus of the submission and the closing argument. There's much more we could get into, but we hit this stage in the case is important. The defense was able to get together their closing argument. The prosecution is going to respond in a week and a half to 2 weeks. I'll be able to share on this show how they are defending their prosecution, responding to what the defense has put before the judge and why they believe they should be able to extradite. We'll get to pick apart their views on this, and then there will be a little bit more from the defense as far as rebutting anything they would say, and then the judge will be set to rule on this case. So with that, we went a bit longer than we typically do, and I thank Brian for helping me to work through all of this. And then I just encourage you to go to dissenter.substack. Oh, I guess Brian just hit it too. So dissenter.substack.com, and there you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. I'm working on some really great pieces on the Biden transition, incoming Biden administration, looking at his record against WikiLeaks and what we might expect from him as far as any kind of war on whistleblowers or leaks during his administration. We'll also be looking into more aspects of the Assange case as we await the decision on January 4th. So you'll want to subscribe to that if you're not a subscriber. There's still 30-day free trials available. And every week there's one that goes out to all the free subscribers. And then there's almost every week there's exclusive piece that goes to just people who are paying for the newsletter. So I thank you for all of your support. And so I'll turn it over to Brian if there's anything he wants to say in general about Shadowproof, and then we'll conclude. Just right now we've we're in a spot at Shadowproof where we're just trying to support in general. I think we're trying to keep our abolition journalism going that he's very good at working on around prisons and ending policing. And so you'll have more to look forward to with that in the coming months.
Thank you, Kevin. Very thorough episode. I appreciate it. Just a final reminder to make sure you're following us wherever you're watching right now. I highly recommend you sign up for Kevin's newsletter. It's a good way to support Shadowproof and support Kevin's work and get something in return. There's other options at shadowproof.com/donate. And stay tuned. Definitely things are a little bit hairy and hectic at the end of the year, especially after a general election like this. We will be sorting through the transition. We'll also be announcing a very exciting reporting fellowship next week at Shadowproof around prison abolition. So keep an eye out for that. And I just wanted to thank everyone for tuning in, for supporting Shadowproof, for telling your friends about us and sharing our work with others. And I hope you have a great weekend, and we will see you next week.